Trade and Business Commission meeting, first of 2022. And we thank you all for logging in this morning. We hope we have a good session and an opportunity to identify and highlight some of the areas in relation to UK manufacturing and the global supply chain, and how we as a nation play a part in that, and how we can continue to be a player or increase our opportunities for the future. And with that, I want to thank our witnesses for coming along. And this morning, we have two panels, and we're going to take an hour for each panel. We have a series of questions that we want to go through. We would ask that we try to stick to that as much as possible. But I'm going to ask the first group, the first panel is Gillian McBride. I'm going to ask Gillian maybe to give a wee small 1 minute profile so as everyone is aware of who we have on the question this morning.
Hello everybody, my name is Jill McBride. I'm a Professor of Innovation and Operations Management at Strathclyde University. I've worked with manufacturing over about 30 years. Right now I am co-director of Interact, which is a network funded by ESRC, and it's part of the Made Smarter family. And it's all about trying to bring in knowledge and expertise we have in the economic and social sciences to help build a stronger UK manufacturing base. And I'm also doing a project that's looking at the impact of COVID on UK manufacturing and the importance of innovation going forward. That's me.
Many thanks, Paul. Jack Semple is my name. Good morning, everybody, and many thanks for the invitation this morning. I run the Engineering and Machinery Alliance of 10 trade associations working in the machinery and component supply chain. So we represent firms that make, for example, and supply machine tools, moldings, handling and processing equipment, automation and control systems, fluid power and air systems, and air compressor systems. So as you can imagine, we work right across the economy, from space and aerospace to oil and gas and food and automotive, rather than a particular silo or sector. Export and trade is very important to us. And I like to think of us as trade associations as communities of capability, which is really important in the current context. And obviously, we're keen to see UK manufacturing advance.
You're on mute, Paul.
Apologies, you think you'd be learning this by now. No, I don't see Dr. Carmen Torres.
Yes, yes. Good morning. I'm here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carmen.
I'm Carmen Torres. I'm the research lead in the Multifunctional Materials Manufacturing Lab at Loughborough University, and I represent academics who work at low TRL levels that can support manufacturing and the manufacturing sciences in terms of materials science, in terms of data, communications, instrumentation for the different machines and machinery that can enable that manufacturing and particular productivity in manufacturing. And I also represent those of us who educate the manufacturers of the future, those who are inculcating the skills and the attitudes and abilities that we are going to need in the manufacturing in the UK in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Thank you.
That bag needs thrown out.
Thank you very much indeed. I want to move on then to Simon, and if Simon Collingwood would be give us just an update.
Hello there. Yeah, just very briefly, my name is Simon Collingwood. I'm Head of External Relations at the University of Sheffield Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. We're a 20-year-old research centre. We're part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. We work with over 120 industrial partners from the large OEMs such as Boeing and Rolls-Royce through to nationally and regionally placed SMEs. We really focus on supporting companies to make their products better, to make their processes better, to make them more productive, more competitive for both national and global markets.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for coming on this morning. I'm just going to kick off with the first question. And we did have a table within our questions, which was, and there's already been reference made to it within our pre-session, and that is to do with manufacturing and the decline in manufacturing. But I'm just going to ask the question, how important is manufacturing to our economy? And is it growing or declining? Because, you know, recent trends have shown us that over the last number of decades, manufacturing has been declining within the UK. And I'm wondering, is that something that is going to continue, or is it something that we can grow upon or build upon? Thank you. And I just asked that basically, if everyone wants maybe to make a small comment on it, or if you feel it's not relevant, you don't need to answer on that if it's not in your area of expertise. But I'm just saying we'll adopt that approach through the session, unless somebody wants to direct a question to one individual. Okay, so Jill, okay, thank you.
I'll start off by saying, yes, I firmly agree. It's manufacturing is essential for our economy. You know, I think apart from the kind of the money and the job it creates, it's really important for innovation. It's a huge driver of innovation. And we know there's a big link between innovation and economic prosperity. So for me, you know, I think the UK has this aspiration to boost investment in R&D to 2.4% of GDP. And I think manufacturing is the largest contributor to R&D expenditure in the UK. So for me, I think manufacturing plays a big role in that particular part. Is it declining? Well, I think when you look at the statistics, it does suggest that, but I don't think statistics tell us the whole story. Very often the statistics we're looking at is the percentage of it contributes to GDP. And yes, you know, we're now down less than 10%. And back in the 70s, we were closer to 25%. But it's not necessarily that manufacturing is contracting. It may be that other areas of the economy are growing. So the jury's out on that. I'm not an economist, but I certainly don't see a depressing picture of manufacturing. In fact, I was chairing an interactive event yesterday, and one of the speakers likened UK manufacturing to being in its spring. And I like that. Being a gardener, I like that analogy. But I think we have to say that the seasons are quite long. But his point was that we're coming out of a winter that's been harsh. We've got, you know, COVID, we've got Brexit. And the new kind of environment is very different, and we've got to feed it in a different way. So the things that I think are important are looking to the future. And when I talk about the future, I'm talking about the longer term future, about what kind of manufacturing do we want to grow? Again, as a gardener, you've got to think about that long-term vision. It's not all about the next 6 months, the next year. So I thought I like that analogy, and I think that's one of hope. So hopefully we'll pick up on that again.
Paul, could I just add, I think it is a critical time for manufacturing. It's a critical time for the economy. And certainly from our members' perspective, the two are very closely linked. While we're 9% of the GDP, there are some very good reports on this subject the last 2 or 3 years. We account for something like 23% of the economy through indirect and induced impacts. And I think that point and the importance to other high value elements of the economy, from marketing downstream to R&D upstream, has been very well mapped. But I think we've really got to, we're at a pivotal point. We've got to get under power, because the technology and the markets are changing quickly. And I think we've got to turbo boost a little bit, because at the moment, we're 24th in the world per employee for adopting robots, and we're only 6% of the European market for automation. So yes, there are some really bright spots, but I think overall, we've got to get moving a bit more strongly.
Something that I would like to add, supporting what Jill and Jack have said, is what we identify as manufacturing. If it's the concept of just being a large manufacturing in terms of cars being put together, aerospace, there may be some reports that say that is declining. However, we really need to consider which other technologies and which other enabling technologies and services are around manufacturing that also should be counted as manufacturing. And I'm talking about the design, I'm talking about the electronics, the intelligent software, the packaging integration of those services, or even the material science. And those areas are definitely blooming and growing in the UK, and they all are there to support manufacturing. So they're also part of the manufacturing sector, and having the right resources, not just in terms of machinery and what we can build, but also the brains that can make the most out of those resources is very important. And I do think that the UK is top class in the world in terms of educating our engineers and manufacturers of the future. So from that perspective, the future is very bright.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, if I can just offer a couple of comments, Chair. I think that sitting here in South Yorkshire, the scars of deindustrialisation are very alive, like they are in many places around the UK, and indeed in many places. And what I would say is that what I see is actually a very optimistic position. Here in the Sheffield-Rotherham border, we've seen the development of a cluster of advanced manufacturing companies that have been magnetised to the area for skills and for capabilities, and for people like ourselves as well, and the universities. One of the things which I think often gets missed when looking at manufacturing is the very important regional and place-based elements. It's very easy to look at the importance of manufacturing from the point of view of what's its GDP, what's its GVA, how many people is it employing, but actually it has a really important part of how people identify with a place. And I think one of the important things for me for manufacturing is how people, just working on this advanced manufacturing park where I sit now, people really identify with being part of the manufacturing sector. Sitting in part of the aerospace sector is part of people's identity in much the same way as perhaps mining or steel was some years ago. And I think that's a really important part of how people feel that they're connected to the wider economy. And I think, having worked in the services sector at various points in my life, that doesn't happen in the same way in the services sector as perhaps it does in manufacturing. And I think part of that is that manufacturing invests in R&D, it invests in its export capability, but it also invests in its skills and its people in a way that the wider services sector simply doesn't.
Thank you very much indeed. And I take a positive approach from what has been said. Instead of seeing dark clouds on the horizon, I want to see a sunrise. And thank you very much indeed. That leads me on then to our next question, and that's coming from Claire. And Claire's one of our colleagues from Northern Ireland. We bat quite strong in this committee from Northern Ireland. So with Claire, thank you, Claire.
Yeah, we're getting all the Northern Irish MPs out of the way at the start, but thanks very much. I just wanted to ask, governments have invested in manufacturing recently. How would you grade that investment, and what impact has it had? Carmen, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Thank you. Thanks very much. The best example that I can think of has been the most recent one, which has been the investment in the manufacturing of the vaccine that is pretty much save our lives, right? In many ways, and it's touched everybody's lives. And the effort that the government has had in manufacturing that is being top class. High value manufacturing catapults as a way of crystallizing that investment in the manufacturing in the broader sense, not just in the pharma, but also in the automotive and the food and drink and the digital technologies. That's perhaps it's been less bright and sparkly, in the sense that from my viewpoint, I think that there is a disconnect between the bottom-up approach and the top-to-bottom approach, and perhaps a stronger leadership to make that continuum come together and be more powerful and more impactful should be necessary. Another aspect to the conversation here is being the investment that Innovate UK is put in particular in the SMEs, small and medium companies that can go forward with proposals to get a bit of money from Innovate UK, from Base, to do their work. My experience working with them, and they are the majority of the companies I work with, they are SMEs, is that they are in a continuous game of chasing the money, gaining the money, and then going back to drawing board with very little time to actually sit down, focus, and do the work. Those proposals, those projects tend to be rather short. A year, 15 months, 18 months are the majority of those. And as I say, they are constantly in that game of chasing the money, not leaving them the time to sit down and truly be productive, squeeze the lemon, as I say, to the maximum. Yeah. So I wonder whether we could take the learnings from this successful storing, manufacturing the vaccine, the biotech, and re-engineer how well that went to then export it to other sectors that perhaps need that much impetus, like the automation and electronics and the digital technologies, food and drink as well. We must remember food and drink is also a very important player in manufacturing. So that's my viewpoint from where I sit.
Okay, thanks very much. Jack, have you anything to add to that in terms of assessment of advanced manufacturing investment?
Yes, thank you. Picking up on Carmen's point about the pandemic, I think it taught us three things. I think it taught us about the importance of manufacturing. I think it taught us how little government knows about the UK supply chain. And actually, I would include a lot of OEMs about that as well, which is another important issue, and tier ones. And I think it showed that we have great strengths in UK manufacturing and also gaps. And we need to find out more about both. But I think given the importance that we would see of manufacturing to UK economic recovery and sustainability and taking a lead in net zero and all those things, I think the government really has to come out much more strongly and explain what is its view of manufacturing. So the government gives a great deal of support in terms of upstream R&D and innovation. The Catapult does a terrific job, and other research organizations. But there's another aspect to that, and that's what's happening on the ground at companies. So technology adoption, skills development, and here the government has not been investing nearly enough. And we really need to hear more about its intentions in this area. So the high value manufacturing catapult has a vision for manufacturing to double its contribution to the UK economy by 2030, which is quite an ambition. But I think we need to hear more about what the government thinks about that, because in comparison with what it's doing elsewhere and the support it's given through COVID to sectors, to other sectors, they're not investing nearly enough, I would suggest. And what is the point about manufacturing that makes it so important compared with other sectors? Manufacturers tend to compete on the global stage. And once you lose the jobs, the IP, and the taxes, they are much more difficult to re-establish than other sectors. So that fault line about how do we get the R&D down to companies is the fault line in government policy at the moment.
Thanks very much. Jill, you were nodding along there. How do you think it has impacted, certainly on the process and performance areas you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said, but I like the fact that people are talking about long-term, they're talking about systems. To me, something I say a lot is not all about the technology. And I think we're investing well in the technology. And I think the UK is well respected for its science and technology base, but it's doing something with that brings economic and social benefit. You know, when we look at history, it's not always the kind of technological innovator who wins the prize, if you like. You know, when we look at, you know, back at cars, you know, it was Henry Ford saw the potential of bringing that system together for economic and social benefit. And, you know, even modern day, I guess, you know, Amazon or Jeff Bezos, it wasn't the technology winner, but he saw the potential to put the system together. So I like the fact that I think UKRI is much more joined up these days. I think they are starting to talk about systems. And as I say, we are starting to look at, it's not just the technology, but we also have to think about the change management, the people, the behaviors. So, yep, that's my kind of view is I think we're in the right direction, but we need more of this joined up and working together.
And if we look at the Made Smarter programme, for example, what's needed is a national sustained programme. And what we've had is a regionally restricted piecemeal drip feed. As just one example, absolutely agree. We need to, and we can see other competitor countries that are doing this, and they're benefiting as a result. And their tax revenue and their competitiveness is benefiting.
Simon, you've maybe been on both sides.
Funding is there, you know, perhaps we can argue about the quantum of it and perhaps some of the application of it and its effectiveness. But I think that there has been a significant amount of funding. The gap for me has been the industrial strategy to really give us a coherence about where we want to go as a country. We saw the innovation strategy launched last year, but at the same time, we're not seeing the sort of the clarity of direction. And I think what really sort of backs that up when it starts to hit the ground is I think something that Jack and Gillian both pointed to, which is short-term funding cycles. You know, we don't have long-term funding pieces which provide the opportunity for firms to invest themselves in their capabilities, in the skills that they require for the future. So there's a mixture of the lack of a strategic piece and then how the funding is being directed to the sector on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chair, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank the panel for those answers. That leads us on to Antonelle, and I think you might have something which is very topical relating to how costs can impact upon your opportunities to move forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, Jack mentioned the ambition for British manufacturing to be a leadership sector in the net zero process all over the world. Maybe starting with Jack, how well placed do you think the UK is actually to play a major part and lead this energy transformation? And to what extent do you think rising energy prices are going to affect the manufacturing industry, both as a threat, but also as an incentive? And also, if you have any views on this, perhaps you could refer to how Britain's decision to be outside the European Union and the European Next Gen Recovery Fund is likely to affect British leadership towards net zero.
Thank you. I think the industrial strategy, first of all, this industrial strategy point that Simon made is important. If I could answer the point about energy costs, I think there's a real paradox here, because on the high energy users, the high energy users, even those who are looking to invest in lower energy production, are looking for lower energy costs. So we have to find a way of reducing energy costs to industry. And in manufacturing, they can be a really important part of cost and global competitiveness. In Europe, we have, from industry's point of view, just about the worst balance between domestic and industrial energy costs. And that's a real issue for retaining jobs in this country. So yes, we want to drive green energy, but we can't get to the position that we say, well, you've got to be green, or there's a paradox there. If you get to the position, you've got to be green, because then we have something which is euphemistically called carbon leakage, which is the jobs just go to abroad to areas which often are much dirtier in terms of carbon. I think in terms of the preparedness for net zero, gets back to what is the skills level in terms of process and technology adoption and development, and the ability to attract investment in UK manufacturing. Because if we can get the know-how into companies, then we're much better placed on net zero. We have got a greater awareness of net zero, I believe, in the UK than in almost anywhere else in the world, which is great, and government deserves credit for that because they've worked hard to create that, and with the support, I have to say, of trade associations. But where are we going to go from that? I think we need to see stronger regulation from government, regulatory leads, and to take business with them. And it's very important to think about the supply chain rather than the well-known large companies. In terms of our relationship with Europe, I think that's a massive issue, but I think there's a lot that the UK has to contribute to the discussion with Europe and other partners, but Europe specifically. I think we've got a lot of know-how in this area in terms of standards and how regulations can evolve. And I would hope that we would keep our communications channels up to Brussels live and active, as well as to other parts of the world.
Thanks. Simon, I saw you nodding quite enthusiastically as part of that. What would be your comments?
On energy costs, it's clearly something that is a major factor for some significant manufacturers across the country, both large and small. I think on our relationship with the EU, it's clearly a factor, but in the sort of small sort of world that I operate in, I think it's not something that crosses my door a lot in terms of commentary from industrial partners. In terms of your wider point about the capabilities of the UK to embrace the low carbon transition, I think that's where I'm very, very confident, and I think that the phrase that was used recently in a meeting I was in with a number of industrial partners was that actually the capability of UK manufacturers to drive and thrive in the low carbon transition is really second to none. It's a question of whether or not there's the support and the funding to be able to enable them to do that. You know, I look around my patch, and whether it's on sustainable aviation fuel, whether it's on hydrogen, there's incredible work being done, and indeed on electrolyzers as well, just down the road. So there's a lot of optimism there, but it's about the coherence of the narrative and the long-term approach to this. I'm personally very optimistic and tend to see net zero as being a potential pathway to reindustrialization of the UK. But I think that there's a lot of stepping stones between that, that vision and where we are at the moment.
Very interesting. Gillian and Carmen, anything to add? I think we're running out of time. So
not much on the energy front, but I would say on the net zero, I agree that I think we are quite well placed, but I think there are big shifts coming. I think there's a tidal shift in consumer choices, and I think COVID has also shown us the worry of bringing things, traveling across the world and disruptions and so on. So it does worry me that, when we talk about some of our big manufacturing sectors like cars and aerospace, with cars, 8 out of 10 cars are being exported. And I think when we talk about the output of aerospace is something like 90% is going overseas. So when we talk about reshoring, there are some opportunities, I think, for the UK, but there's also, I think, a lot of people in boardrooms across the world asking why are they manufacturing here? And that does worry me.
Yeah. Carmen?
I just want to make a small comment about the net zero, because our ambition really is to become net positive. And there are three aspects that I would like to mention. One of them is where we're going to get the energy, and renewables definitely is a strong contender. Lots of science and technology being developed in the UK, tidal, solar, CO2 capture, etc. That needs to be, the efforts need to be joined up. So with the efforts that they've got in terms of renewable energies out there, they need to be they need to be harvested and harnessed to help manufacturing. The second aspect is in terms of instrumentation and control. So the 1 kilowatt of energy that we are going to use is efficient 100%, rather than having a leaking pipeline, so to speak. So instrumentation that allows us for distance monitoring and to make sure that we fix what is broken in time, on time, not letting generators run at non or inefficient conditions. And finally, we've been talking about cars and large manufacturing sector, but food and drink, electronics, those are quite high wasteful production manufacturing sectors as well. So we also need to tackle the first time right, instead of thinking that the waste from those industries is cheap enough to just almost like sweep it under the carpet. We also need to tackle those things. And if we were to bring those three buckets together, where we get more energy, how we make sure that all the energy we get is used efficiently, and finally minimizing waste, that would be a good step forward towards net zero. But as I say, the ambition is to become net positive.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll move swiftly on to Dr. Charles Rose and welcome him to his first meeting as a commissioner.
My first question. As someone who has developed a manufacturing business, I've always been captivated by 3D printing as something which I saw as expediting the development cycle, particularly in plastics. And I just really wondered how well placed the UK is in terms of these new manufacturing techniques, the additive manufacturing, which obviously could add huge value and take time out of the manufacturing processes. And I'd like to push that to Simon in the first instance.
Thank you, Charles. Really interesting question. I think the additive manufacturing is an absolutely critical, vital part of the future of manufacturing globally. The size of the market is projected to grow many times over coming years, and I think that there's a few elements of it which I think are quite important just to kind of note here. One is that it has the possibilities of incredible lightweighting, which I think will be really important for the route to net zero. And I think that also what it can do is move us away from, mass batch manufacturing to much more smaller, personalized production, localized production, which I think will be quite an important feature potentially of manufacturing in the future. Very local, bespoke manufacturing of whether it's a seal for something or a component for something. I think that it's also one of the things I think will be really important for the UK is that when we think about some of the large infrastructure projects and indeed manufacturing objectives for future years, whether it's a defense program like Tempest, or whether it's large infrastructure replacement of all bridges on British roads or HS2 or whatever it might be, is that 3D printing is part of how the procurement works through the system. So we're actually thinking about the supply chain and the capabilities of this manufacturing mode for supporting some of those initiatives. We are, as an organization, part of the Zero Carbon Humber project, which is looking to decarbonize the Humber industrial cluster. And I think that there's real massive opportunities for additive manufacturing around some of those initiatives. So I'm really very optimistic. I think the UK has got huge potential in this area, but I think that there's got to be some incentives and drive to kind of really make sure that it lands properly.
Thank you. Can I move that question on to Carmen and see what she has to say on this?
Thank you for that. And I am going to be on the other side of Simon. I do agree with what he has said and the tremendous opportunities 3D printing brings to small companies, to larger companies. But I'm going to play now the other side of the coin, and is all the challenges and the threats that we have in the UK as a country. Now, again, visually, so imagine a cake. 3/4 of that cake is hardware. It's 3D printing hardware. And from the 1/4 that we've got left, let's divide that into 3. One of them is materials, the other one is software, and the other one is post-processing. That's sort of the market size. Those 3/4 of the cake, unfortunately, none of that is in the UK. They tend to be German players, tend to be American players, Israeli players. The market is not consolidated at all. Plenty of acquisitions and mergers, etc. So if the UK is not a strong player in the hardware, that definitely puts a risk that we're always on the back wagon waiting for other countries, as I say, in particular America and the USA, forgive me, and Germany to see what they develop for us to then use. Now, in terms of the materials, remember the 1/3 of the 1/4 that was left, the UK is moving fast, and is moving in a very clever way, because thanks to the research base that we've got in terms of alloys and metals and material science, we're able to contribute to the materials. One of the big drawbacks of 3D printing is a lack of a broad palette of materials to use. Charles, you mentioned plastics. There are also metals and ceramics and composites that can be made in 3D printing. However, that palette, as I say, is quite limited at the moment. So if the UK could make the most out of that, as I say, making use of the research base that we've got in that field, that would be a great step forward. But echoing what Simon has said, we do need investment in that to move that forward and be competitive. Forgive me.
So this sounds like a play towards, this is the piece where you have the competitive advantage and actually build on that.
Yes. Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if the material, one of the drawbacks of 3D printing sometimes is the mechanical properties of that final piece. That in some cases is not as good as, say, a cast piece, right? But if we are able to have an R&D that moves forward those materials that make that final part functional prototype better, that would place the UK in a strong position. As I say, we are less competitive in terms of the hardware. In fact, we're not competitive at all in terms of hardware. But we could enter the game from a materials viewpoint, taking advantage of what we know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gillian, can you add to this?
I think the only thing I would add is going back to my systems point, and I think this is an example of a technology where we really need to kind of think beyond just the technology. You know, we've all seen Star Trek and the replicators. You know, we're talking about that kind of technology, and it's the people who can make that leap and take the technology out of the factories and into our homes. I think there's huge opportunities there. You know, there's social benefits, there's economic benefits. But we've also got to think then about, if we are going to be at the forefront of some area that develops it further, how do we then anchor some of the core bits of technology within UK so that we're making sure that we are manufacturing some of the things that are giving us these social and economic benefits?
Yeah, good, thanks. And Jack,
thanks, Charles. Just to amplify one point that Carmen made, I think there's a great opportunity for the UK to establish the reputation for quality in this area, because quality is going to be one of the issues that really matters in additive going forward. And if we get the right foundations there in terms of standards and processes, that could be a real advantage. But I think also there's a crying need in the additive sector for a broader understanding of its relevance, its capability, and the role that it's going to play in the future. And I think that's something that we really need to work on not only with the technology people and the engineers, but with the financial community, the FDs and companies and so on, so they can really understand what this is about and the potential for it.
Thanks very much, panel, for a really splendid set of answers.
Thank you very much indeed. And can we move on then to Jeff? I think Jeff's coming in on question number 5.
Thank you very much, Chair. Much appreciated. I'm riveted at the positiveness of the panel talking about the opportunity in the UK. I think it's fantastic. From my perspective, though, does large-scale manufacturing like automotive actually have any sort of future in the UK, or are we actually talking about a much more specialist and smaller scale production? And I'll try and move away from any answer that involves integrated supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
Can we start with Simon on that one, please?
Thank you. A really good question. We put together a panel a few months ago where we looked at prospects of Jet Zero, and we had people from a range of companies speaking and participating in that. And the answer that came through, and bearing in mind that the aerospace industry in the UK employs around about 260,000 people, it's spread across multiple parts of the UK where there were some concentrations, and it has a fairly significant supply chain, both nationally but also globally. And indeed, the scale of R&D in the sector is phenomenal. Now, I use it as a sort of a starting point because it's clearly a significant manufacturer in the UK. It's a significant part of our economy. The answer when we asked the question, is Jet Zero possible, was very much absolutely from a technology point of view, without doubt. It's difficult, it's incredibly difficult, and it will require a significant amount of investment in time and clever people solving problems. But it's absolutely possible, but it relies upon an investment in reducing some of the risk of those investments over the long term. And for me, it comes back to, what is that industrial strategy? Is this something that our government and indeed our regional players, our regional governments want to back and support? Because I think that there is potential for large scale manufacturing in the UK. But I think that there's a step before that, which is, what's the industrial strategy?
Yeah.
Gillian, just to pick up the industrial strategy conversation and where it fits, and just to throw a little additional in there, will we simply employ as many people, or do the systems take over?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I mean, you've heard my view that I think a lot of people are saying that we're moving away from the factory as being the focus of production, and that it will be more distributed. It will be people working together in networks. And quite a few of my fellow panelists have been saying similar things. But there are some areas where I think you do need scale. So for example, if we're talking about our electric cars, as we are, to make that happen, we need the battery capability. And the investment that's needed in these things does mean that it has to be at scale. So I think it's not an absolute no from me, but I do think we're probably looking at a more distributed system. But absolutely what you're saying, I think having that strategy, that long-term vision, and thinking not just about, oh, we've got this great technology, but thinking about, what are we going to do with it? So thinking about the applications, working it back, thinking about then what's needed, doing this kind of road mapping activity. And then that, I think, takes us to the point where we say, what do we really need to invest in? What are the core things that will anchor the manufacturing and the innovation in the UK? So I think that kind of call to try and not just come up with the next kind of, the next drone or whatever that's going to work, but think about, well, if we're going to go down that route, have we got the capabilities to make these drones if they're going to be so crucial in the future economy?
Jack, betting on winners, where do we start?
We start, I think, by understanding the supply chain. Or we probably start with Simon's industrial strategy. But within that,
have a plan.
But after that, I think we need to map what is our supply chain at the moment? What are our supply chain capabilities? There's huge gaps in understanding, not only within government, within OEMs and tier ones as well, as to what the UK has to offer and what its potential is. So I think we build on understanding of what we have now, what we're going to need in the future. So it's been said before, but how do we take the automotive firms' supply chain at the moment and equip them for the future? I think also in terms of the jobs, there's 2 points I'd make. If we don't adapt to the new technologies and the new trading environment, then we're going to have far fewer jobs, that's for sure. And it's not only in manufacturing that we'll have fewer jobs, but to get back to the point I made earlier, the report by Oxford Economics for one of my members, the Manufacturing Technologies Association, it's all the jobs that are directly, not only directly, but indirectly created by manufacturing. That's why manufacturing is so significant. But the opportunity is to really grow manufacturing with the new technologies, and that will create more jobs, and it will create more jobs not only in manufacturing but in support industries as well.
Thanks very much, Jack. Carmen, as a last word, because unfortunately the rest of the panelists seem to think we should have a plan. Would you like to comment on what actually happens and what we do in the UK?
And I would like to continue Jack's argument there, in that in order to have a strong, productive manufacturing, we do need to remember that there are suppliers and typically SMEs who are going to be able to give us the digital technologies, the digital tools, to be able to improve our productivity, and that we need the skills, the talent who can make it happen. So without that supply chain, and I know that at the beginning you said, forget about the supply chain for a minute, but it is true that we do need that supply chain to make the manufacturing truly productive and providing those jobs into their communities, local communities, the make local, that we are also so in favor of, because we know the benefits that will bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, unfortunately, I have to leave it there.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff. Thank you, and thank the panel for those answers. Move swiftly on to Paul Bloomfield.
Thanks very much, Chair. I guess I will really want to kind of pursue this theme a little bit more. Carmen just now and earlier, together with Simon and Jack, I think, made comments about the relationship between manufacturing and the wider economy, but largely framed, until I think the point you were beginning to make, Carmen, largely framed in the context of the added value manufacturing brings to the wider economy and the creation of additional jobs and so on. But I wonder if I could kind of look at the issue the other way around and ask how far manufacturing draws on, in particular the relationship with the services sector, how far manufacturing draws on the strengths of our services sector and is dependent on them. And perhaps I could start with Jack. You're at the cutting edge of this.
The manufacturing, first of all, I should say manufacturing is an important service sector in itself. And so we've seen, for example, with coming out of the EU, the challenges that are arising and understanding which maintenance and service engineers can go to and from Europe and what they can do when they get there. So the servitization of manufacturing is developing and will develop further. But more broadly, I think there's scope for strengthening the UK manufacturing understanding and brand, starting within the people that you want to recruit to work in the sector. So I think, and it would be great to have advocacy from government, but I think companies themselves could do far more to get out into their local community and project themselves more positively in terms of what they do. Maybe engineers aren't the greatest at doing that, but I'm sure some of them are, and they can find people who have the skills to help them. I think that's a really important point. I don't think manufacturing is supported by the finance community as strongly as it could be. There are exceptions. I could think of banks that are doing terrific work in that area. But if you think that we're a powerhouse in London in the finance world, I'm not sure that that's coming through strongly enough by far to the UK sector. And I think we need to understand why that is the case.
Thanks very much. You make a really important point there, which I certainly feel as a MP representing one of our great industrial cities traditionally, Sheffield. Jill, would you like to add to any reflections on the dependence of manufacturing on the services sector?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in part with the manufacturing recovery plan for Scotland, and that's certainly something that we've been talking about, the ecosystem around manufacturing and working together. I like the point that was made there about branding, and again, thinking about if we want to put ourselves up as being green, sustainable, then I think there's a job to be done that we're not very good at doing, but we've got the potential there. But no, again, I think it's the working together is important, and the regional part I think comes back in there because it's easier perhaps to do that at a more local level.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm conscious of time, but I wonder, Simon and then Carmen, whether there's any brief comments you'd like to add.
Totally agree with comments from Jack and Gillian. I think the only other comment I would make is that I think what's called the through life engineering services or outcome-based manufacturing, I think is really important here, where we're not talking just simply about the provision of products, a jet engine, for example, but we're talking about the outcomes that it's trying to achieve through the life cycle of it. And I think financial and legal services in the UK have got incredible capabilities globally in that area. And I think that is something where I think UK manufacturers, together with those sectors, could benefit enormously.
Thanks, Carmen.
And for me, good example of how manufacturing, or one of the aspects of manufacturing, is exported, and is one of the silver ladies of our sector, design. A lot of what we call manufacturing that we export is actually the design of a product, the design of a system, etc. And on the other hand, something that doesn't manufacturers complain that they are not supported that well is the finances. So how come? And this is really a question rather than an answer. I'm sorry, Paul. It's more like, how do we do so well in some aspects and not that well in others? How do we support manufacturers so well in some aspects but not that much on the other aspects? So I think that this is something that we need to get together and solve, because they deserve a chance. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Many thanks. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And the interesting thing is that don't depend upon politics. Business will find a way. that's maybe my way of putting it across. That leads me on and to the last person in this session, this first sector, and that's Stephen Farry, and by no means last in this section, but doesn't mean he's
sure.
So I'll pass over to Stephen.
Thanks very much, Chair, for that, and good morning to our witnesses. I want to ask a question around skills and access to labour, but I'm going to sort of break it down into three components, and I appreciate we're tight for time, so we'll try and pack as much in as concisely as possible. Basically, the three components would be, first of all, any comments on the immediate challenges from the loss of freedom of movement in terms of access to skills and where that's having a particular impact. The second aspect is any comments you wish to make around, I suppose in particular, the UK government's approach to skills at present around areas such as reforms for further education, reforms of qualifications, apprenticeships, what you like, what could be done better in that regard. And perhaps just arising from that as maybe a short third strand. Given, shall we say, the smaller scale of manufacturing in the UK compared to some of our European colleagues, Is there any particular lessons from what they do, particularly around their approach to professional, technical, and vocational skills that we should be trying to apply better in the UK? This has been something we've been chasing for many generations to learn that, but any further thoughts on that angle? So maybe start with Carmen and Simon, and then Gillian and Jack.
Thank you. I'm really happy you're asking this question, Stephen. We've been peppering through the conversation this morning the importance of skills and talent that will make it happen, right? That will make that supply chain work, and therefore support manufacturing and do the manufacturing. The UK is, and this is no surprise to anybody, this UK is one of the top countries in the world in terms of education. And we have lots of international people coming to the UK to get their education. And I'm an example of those. But if we don't have the manufacturing sector and all the enabling technologies that go around that, we're going to educate those people for them to go back again. And we're going to back home again, or gone elsewhere again, brain drain. And that would be such a shame that we make such an investment in those people for them to then go elsewhere or flourish elsewhere. The second point I wanted to make is that it's widely accepted that if we want to make that reshoring happen, i.e. those companies that went away at some point and are thinking about coming back, they're only going to consider coming back if they've got the right talent locally for them to work in that company, in that factory, or in the enabling companies around that. So if we really are serious about getting those companies reshoring back to the UK, we do need to invest in those skills, and it needs to be multi-level. And we're talking about people at the entry level, we're talking about apprentices, we're talking about people with degrees, PhDs. The whole pipeline has to be sufficiently and healthily populated, adding the dimension of EDI, the diversity, right? Allowing people from minorities and different gender, women in particular, etc., to also consider manufacturing as a career, and a career that is going to make them go to the next level, for them to grow professionally and personally, and not to think of engineering as the blue overalls and the oily hands that previous generations perhaps had. So we all had that job to do in terms of telling the world that manufacturing is much more than building cars and wearing a screwdriver. They're all the different industries and technologies that go around it. It's very, very important, and it's worth investing their life in a career in manufacturing. Thank you.
Simon?
I think good comments there from Carmen. I agree with wholly. In terms of immediate challenges from freedom of movement restrictions, it's not something that's really crossed my path at all. In terms of UK government approach to apprenticeships, I think that I'm drawn to the government's heightening of apprenticeships and the equivalency with the academic route. But again, without wishing to sound like Oliver Twist, I think we need to see more on that. I think we need to see more focus on technical education and the opportunity pathways for people who are 16, 17, 18, and what that perhaps non-university route looks like. I think the other point I would make is about continuous professional education, because we're seeing it in with our manufacturing companies that have got, they've got brilliant manufacturing engineers and technicians working in their companies, but as they're looking to invest in digitization and automation and robotics, I think that, and noting that the UK doesn't sit in the top 20 for robots per head in the UK, I think that helping manufacturing engineers who are very skilled and experienced to learn about data analysis and digitization, I think, is incredibly important.
And Gillian, and then finally Jack.
I think Carmen, I could have said exactly what Carmen said. Totally agree that we need to make manufacturing attractive again. and I've been out interviewing companies about this COVID project, and I'm hearing time and time again, lack of people is a major problem. We'd an aging workforce in the first place. A lot of the people who took redundancy during COVID, it was the over 50s. And I think the problem at the other end with the apprentices during COVID, a lot of companies failed to kind of invest in apprenticeships. And there was figures last year in the manufacturer that suggested 64% of companies in manufacturing had failed to take on the apprentices they needed. Another study came out this week that said manufacturing has got something like an 18% unfilled positions. So we're just not getting the people out of schools and universities wanting to come in the sector. And I think we've all got a job to do there.
And finally, Jack, please.
Thanks, Stephen. Whenever the skills and training issue is mentioned, a group of firms, for example, at one of EMA's trade association members' general meeting or whatever, there's such animated discussion. You almost can't stop it. This is a massive issue. EMA did some research, which we published December 2020, which highlighted right across our trade association membership, which is right across the economy, therefore, the skills gaps. Biggest skills gap was in digital. And I noticed the HVMC has talked of a workforce crisis and a lack of and a skills gap holding back investment. This is a huge issue. It gets back, we're seeing apprenticeship starts for a variety of reasons are well down. We've been bombarding Bays and the DFE with all sorts of information and skills from EMA. It gets down to, again, it gets down to money. Money for apprenticeships is being starved. We've got one signed off apprenticeship. They appealed against the funding. They can't get anybody at any FE college to train it because the funding from government isn't adequate, and that's a critical in a critical sector for the economy, right across the economy. So we need more money for training, for apprenticeships. We need some more support for SMEs. I have to say, we also need SMEs to step up to the mark themselves. But it gets down to the issue about how seriously does government see manufacturing and advanced engineering. To take Carmen's point about this is a whole massive infrastructure. Take one tiny example. Air compressors account for 10% of all industrial electricity use in the UK, and 15% of it just goes in leaks. So we need to train the people absolutely to move forward, and government needs to decide. It's a huge fault line for it. How seriously does it take this? And are we going to invest in the future? We've just spent huge amounts of money keeping the economy going in sectors which sadly were forced to close. A very much smaller proportion of that needs to be truly invested in this key sector for the future.
Thank you very much. I would love to discuss skills for the next hour, but I appreciate we have to hand it back to the chair for the next half of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And I want to thank Gillian, Carmen and Jack. And I know Simon will be staying on for the second group, but thank you very much for your input. And I think it has been extremely enlightening. It has identified some areas that we need to get focus on and ensure that there is a plan and a way to bring us forward to be a major player in the world supply and manufacturing end. Thank you very much indeed. And that leads me on to our second session. And you can stay on if you wish. There's no problem. I have no issue on that. So, but the second group, and I'm going to Simon's already given us an introduction, so I'm going to just move straight on to Tim. And if Tim maybe wants to give us a wee 1 minute pen profile.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. Great. My name is Tim Ward. I'm a principal consultant and director of NPTW Consultants. I work mainly in trading goods and rules of origin. Previously, I was a trade negotiator on behalf of the Australian government for about 20 years and negotiated the rules of origin in Australia's trade agreements with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and New Zealand, and also was our lead negotiator in TPP for rules of origin for a few years. And following that, I spent 3 years at the Australian mission to the WTO in Geneva, working as our representative on groups like the Trade and Goods Committee, the Committee for on Technical Barriers to Trade, Rules of Origin, Customs, and so forth. And more recently worked as an advisor to the UK Department of International Trade, advising on strategy in negotiations for Rules of Origin, and now advising industry on similar sorts of issues.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. And then we have Richard. Is Richard Rumbelow.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Richard Rumbelow from Make UK. I lead on our international trade policy work, covering both our relationships with the EU and also on our international work following the UK government's Free Trade Agreement programme. In addition to that, I'm also the Membership Relations Director and therefore monitor closely what our members are saying on the matter of international trade as it affects their business operations going forward. I've been with Make UK for 5 years. We are the representative body for UK manufacturing, covering somewhere in the region of 22,000 firms across the UK. Prior to that, I have specialised in public policy and public affairs for a range of sectors, primarily digital and telecommunications.
Thank you very much indeed. And that will lead us in, and I'm going to ask the first question, and it is, what has been the impact of the new EU trading relationship on the UK's manufacturing sector? And I'll ask that to Richard, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we have seen so far is that the changes that we've seen in our trading relationship with the EU has affected the practicalities of trade between the UK and the EU. Most members report some degree of challenge in how that has affected them over the course of the last 12 months, both in terms of understanding the requirements, particularly when it comes to customs administration and related matters of being able to import and export goods, but also just in some of the other impacts that they've had to bear in terms of that. First of all, the costs, certainly of recruiting and hiring additional capacity for them to be able to understand that, whether that's internal resource or the hire of external advisors. Secondly, the actual cost of, for example, customs administration, which obviously is a new cost burden for them, particularly for EU trade. And lastly, of course, some of the related impacts of trade disruption, supply chain issues that have affected trade between the UK as those customs and administrative requirements begin to bed in. And of course, we're only part of the way through some of those changes which were introduced from the 1st of January last year. We've had a further suite of changes applied to the UK border from the 1st of January this year, which affects both the administration and timeliness of the administration of trade, both now for imports as well as for exports. And of course, we await further changes during the course of this year in regard to the UK border as it affects more specialist goods, agricultural products, food products, and alike. And lastly, firms are also with a keen eye ahead to the 1st of January next year, when product labelling legislation changes here and the application of new UK or GB specific product labelling for goods to be sold here on the Great British market. So yes, undoubtedly Europe has, the changes that have taken place have affected trade between the UK and EU and that administrative understanding and ability to do that. And certainly from the most recent work that we've done with our members, we reported most recently early this month that 66% of them state that that the departure from the EU has hampered their business operations during the course of the last 12 months. And with concern that will obviously continue into this year and next for the reasons I've just outlined.
Thank you very much. Does Simon or Tim wish to add anything to that?
Yes. Certainly, look, most of the issues that are really affecting business were mentioned by Richard there. It's difficult to quantify the impact that it's been having so far, partly because it's still an evolving situation. The other factor being that it's not normal trade at the moment because of the COVID effect on things. But two of the things that certainly stand out, I think, are we've seen the videos and the images of trucks lining up trying to get to Dover to move across the channel. Those sorts of delays are particularly significant, especially given the number of manufacturers that work on just-in-time supply chains, that they're unable to rely on being able to meet those, which has flow-on effects for delays. And also, as was previously mentioned, the new administrative arrangements that people that haven't, or manufacturers that haven't traded outside of Europe previously would be quite unfamiliar with the fact that the sorts of things that they need to deal with. The rules of origin can be quite a minefield for people that, despite the headlines that tell us that we're getting zero tariff access to trading partners, what isn't made clear initially is that that only applies to goods which meet the rules of origin, which can be less than transparent, aren't necessarily the most objective things in the world at times. They have a political edge to them, and that adds an additional burden. The people that are most, or the companies that are most likely to face that additional burden without having the resources necessarily to deal with that are the small and medium-sized enterprises. When it's new to them, the burden for them becomes that much more significant. The bigger companies, the major manufacturers, the autos industry and so forth, a lot of those will be in a reasonable position to deal with it because they have staff already dedicated to the roles of dealing with customs, dealing with the rules of origin, dealing with moving goods around.
Thank you very much indeed. Simon, have you anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And that leads us on then. I'm going to pass over to Hilary for Hilary's question.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. And just following up the answers we've just heard from Richard and Tim. Richard, you've talked about the costs of the new trading relationship. Any immediately apparent benefits that you could point to?
I think one benefit that potentially has come through, and I think this will emerge in time, is that firms perhaps have a view which I'll summarize as this: going global but remaining European. And what I mean by that is that there are going to be opportunities outside of the EU, which I think firms will take more seriously and want to investigate more seriously as part of their trading portfolio. Europe is still going to be a significant part of the UK's manufacturing base when it comes to export and trade, for reasons which I'm sure we'll go through the rest of the session. But I think there is now an appetite, a view that they can look beyond the European shores to international markets where that appetite for UK manufactured goods is strong and will continue to be strong. So there is that opportunity, but I don't think it can be ignored. And that, but my comment there is by no means as a suitable reason to or suitable counter to the fact that firms are still getting to grips with the changes that have taken place for the movement of goods between the UK and European Union. And we're going to be in that cycle for some time as both we move from out of the pandemic impacts of this into the more straight issues that affect trade between the UK and European Union, and making sure that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement works beneficial for both the UK and the EU in making that arrangement as simple as possible in the future. And if I may just touch on one point, I know we've just referred to trading goods here, which is obviously important, but services is also an critical part of UK manufacturing too. The ability to send staff to the European Union, both for the purposes of work, but also for the purposes integral to manufacturing. So that's commissioning, installation, service, and the like. What we haven't seen yet is the impact of the TCA on those business movements, because pandemic of restrictions have limited the ability to travel for all but essential emergency reasons. Once we move away from that, once barriers begin to be removed for the ability for people to trade, what will be interesting to see is how firms have prepared themselves to allow their employees to travel to the European Union and to comply with the rules of each member state when it comes to entry for the purposes of work. We haven't seen the impact of that yet, but that is one certainly aspect we will have to keep under close review as those travel restrictions become reduced over this year.
That's really helpful. Now, just obviously there was nothing to prevent British businesses from trading with the rest of the world before Brexit, was there? So is it that is it you think that there will be a greater focus on it now because there may be a concomitant impact on our trade with the European Union?
I think in both sides, I think generally both the UK and European business want to continue and work as closely as they have done in the past. No question about that. For the 40 years history of integration that we've seen across supply chains, across commercial, professional relationships, and the ability for the UK to be that geographically close to that central market, both for those supply chains, but also for the opportunity of selling direct finished goods into that market as well. What we have to ensure is that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement moves on and develops the relationship so that ease of trade continues in the best format possible going forward. But I do think that there has always been a more international view of UK manufacturing beyond the European Union, both for supply chain aspects, but also for finished goods sales as well. I do think there's an increased sense that is a wider opportunity that needs to be investigated and developed. What that does mean is that for many firms, they will have to develop the skills to understand what that means, the resources to be able to do it more successfully, to ensure that government supports them in providing the intelligence, the market information, and some necessary, if you like, concierge type services that allow firms entry opportunities into new and evolving markets. Okay. That appetite is there, but I think it will become more of an integral part of how firms assess their international trading activity.
Okay, that's very helpful. Can I turn to you, Tim? Obviously, the TCA avoided tariffs on trading goods between the UK and the EU, and so I want to focus on non-tariff barriers. And we've heard from Richard about the costs and the time and the fact that a number of the implications we haven't yet fully seen, both because of COVID and some things being delayed. Can we just begin with rules of origin, which you mentioned? Which are the sectors of the British manufacturing economy where you think rules of origin could prove to be a bit of a problem?
It's a good question. It really depends on the model that we take and the approach that we take to negotiating the rules of origin. For instance, in the case of autos, the rules of origin in TCA recognise the fact that manufacture of autos between the UK and EU is quite integrated already. And so the rule of origin that exists for that sets a relatively high threshold of regional value content in order to meet the rules and to allow trade across the channel. If you apply that same rule of origin to trade outside of the EU-UK bubble, it would be incredibly difficult for UK manufacturers to meet the rule of origin because there is not enough UK content in the goods, in the vehicles that are being produced here. And so it's important that when the UK continues to negotiate its trade agreements with other players and other partners, that it bears that in mind and works hard to ensure that the thresholds more accurately reflect the nature of the production taking place just within the UK. The autos is a big one. Yep.
Yes, just pursuing that auto point. I mean, from the EU's point of view, they've made it very clear they want to grow a car battery manufacturing industry in the EU, and therefore they probably wouldn't be very keen to change the rules of origin arrangements with the UK to allow UK car manufacturers to bring in batteries, say, from Japan. And isn't that the reason why we are now beginning to see announcements about battery manufacturing here in the United Kingdom? Because the car manufacturers know they've got to do that to be able to meet the rules of origin requirements to continue to sell, just under 2,000 cars a day to the EU.
Yeah. It's certainly part of the need. Yeah, certainly but it also speaks to a number of the issues that are growing up in the world more generally, that we'll talk a little bit later on, I believe, on things to do with onshoring and so forth. And having a larger proportion of the key parts of the supply chain and the manufacturing process taking place relatively locally is strategically a very sensible thing to be doing, and it's an area where, if the UK is serious about being a major autos manufacturer in the future, it needs to be looking at all parts of the supply chain and encouraging the development of new investment in the different parts and the key parts of the supply chain.
Okay, just one other question. I mean, the government recently announced that it is further delaying the implementation of UK REACH, which is the new system for the chemicals industry in the UK to register its chemicals, having taken a decision not to be part of the EU REACH system. Now, I mean, evidence was given to the select committee I chaired, saying it would cost the chemicals industry, as I recall, about £1 billion in effect, nugatory costs just to replicate what we have at the moment. The fact that the government has delayed the full implementation of that, as I recall, to 2025. What do you read into that? I don't know, any of our witnesses would like to comment on that. And allied to it, what impact do you think this is all going to have on the nature of supply chains? Because if it's difficult to bring stuff in the way that we have in the past, might that lead to more manufacturers looking for supply chains within the UK, but also vice versa in the EU, where they say it's a hassle to get stuff from Britain, so let's buy from elsewhere in the EU. How do you think this is going to play out? I don't know who wants to touch on that. I know we're running out of time for my bit.
I'll have a go at that question first. I think what it's showing is the practicalities of the TCA is very separate from the tone and the delivery of what the TCA was meant to do. And I think there will be other occasions and other issues where the practical reality of delivering a regulatory change to a sector has to be thought through a lot more carefully. The practicalities of it, the delivery of it, as well as obviously the cost implication for business in that compliance process. And the REACH decision, as you've alluded to, confirms that in all those cases, that the implementation of a unique model for the UK has significant operational significant operational reach, but also cost impacts for businesses trying to comply with that. Not just UK businesses, of course, but international businesses who have to bring product into the UK as well. So this is not just a single cost for one operator in the UK. I think we've already seen that in other areas too. And I alerted the panel, of course, to the change in product market regulation coming into effect from the 1st of January next year. That's a delay of 1 year from the original intention of bringing it into effect from the 1st of January this year. Again, because the infrastructure for that product regulation isn't fully in place yet. And there's a lot of guidance to work through to ensure businesses both on this side of the channel, the European side, and internationally are ready for those changes and the right infrastructures in place. So the timetable of some of these very critical impacts to business are still being thought through, policy still being worked out, and the implementation of that clearly will take time to get through. So I don't see either of those two being unique in changes that will come forward. In terms of the point, does the UK become less or more attractive? I think it depends on the nature of the product you're either importing or exporting from the UK, and the cost impact of that business change to you. If you're supplying a relatively low amount of quantity product, a more specialist product into the UK, the cost of administration for that may exceed the commercial value of doing so. So products in the margins of import to the UK may become less beneficial for a European supplier to think about that and to service the UK market going forward. So that means that we will have to have a domestic supply of that product, or an alternative non-EU source of supply for that product in order for that still to happen. So it's those decisions that firms will be looking at now very closely to see if the cost of business of importing to the UK still remains valuable and profitable to do so.
Okay, that is really helpful. I've run out of time. Over to you, Paul. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Hilary. And that leads us on to Tamara. Tamara asked her question.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, to what extent do you think those people setting UK trade policy have a good understanding of modern supply chains? And I'd like to start with Simon, please.
Thank you, Tamara. I think that to be entirely frank, I think that question is probably a little bit beyond my bailiwick at the HVMC and indeed the AMRC. All I can point to is some fairly laboured and long-standing experience of when I worked in trade policy many years ago, and the level of engagement with business organizations and indeed non-governmental organizations, charities principally, was fairly robust and far-reaching. And so I think that we at that time as officials, we had fairly strong understanding of the different elements. But as I say, that's fairly tired memory now. And I think you might be better speaking to Richard or Tim.
Well, I'll be asking both of them, but thank you for that input. Okay, Tim, I wonder what your thoughts are, please.
Yeah, look, building up the level of expertise to be able to argue these points and to understand just the implications of what you're doing is something which does take a lot of time, and it does require a lot of contact. A couple of interesting things to my mind is that since mid-2019, I think we've had 3 different UK trade secretaries, we've had 4 different business secretaries. The learning curve, despite the best will in the world, is quite long. Added to that, the effect that we've had of COVID, where all of the normal communication channels have sort of been heavily disrupted, means that it's very difficult for people to build up the necessary expertise to be thought leaders in this sort of area. I knew from my time as a trade negotiator that my primary source of information was always to go out to industry, because they're the experts. I came in with an economics background and various other things in political science and so forth, but I'm not a chemist and I'm not an engineer. And so when it comes to understanding the processes that are required in order to develop products, manufacture products, get them to market, build up the links with international suppliers, I had no illusions that I was an expert when it came to those sorts of things. And so, of course, I turned immediately to our industry contacts. Now, as Simon just mentioned, those sorts of contacts have always been quite good within the UK. But as I say, at this very critical time, they've been terribly disrupted because we no longer have that, or we haven't for the last 2 years had that level of face-to-face contact where you can ask those sorts of questions and you can get into these free-ranging discussions with the experts in industry to tell you how different policy options, different issues out there will affect the way that they are doing business and what the best outcomes for them could be.
Okay, so before I go to Richard, and I had that in my head, is it Richard or Robert? And I do apologise, but I think it's the run below part of your name. I'm so sorry, it's the rolling R's. But before I go to that, Tim, I just want to ask as a second part of that question, if they are engaging, as you say, and I'm sure they are, and I have evidence in my sector that they are they listening? Because if what the trade experts are saying goes against political will, therein is the rub. Would you agree with that?
It's always a difficult balance. There are pressures coming in on all sides for politicians, that they have their electorate to consider, they have their local interests to consider, they have the party priorities to consider, and that will always balance things. So any of the agreements that are negotiated and any outcomes that we get from that always have a strong political edge to them. So you can hear the message, but you can't necessarily do terribly much about it, and you can't necessarily put anything like the ideal outcomes from an industry perspective into place, because you're trying to balance so many other factors, either in a trade negotiation or in industry policy issues generally.
And arguably this is more evident here where emotions are so heightened.
Indeed, yes. And we're in an environment where you've got such strong divisions in politics, and everything is seen with a very strong and quite narrow black and white type of political lens at the time. That makes life even more difficult again.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'll hand over to Richard to answer this question as well, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara. I think a number of things have happened here at the same time. I think the pandemic impacts have undoubtedly put a spotlight on where our global supply chains into the UK come from, how vulnerable are they, how diverse are they? And I think what we have seen as a result of the pandemic, the economic disruption as a result to the physical infrastructure of supply chain has certainly brought that question to the fore, both for policymakers and also for business. The second impact, obviously, the EU trade impacts, and we've touched on that already, but certainly the questions about how robust those are going to be, how practical they're going to be in the future, how impactful are those barriers to trade which have been inserted as a result of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Is that going to change the balance of certain supply chains? Is there going to be a need for firms to reconsider that, either to bring back some of that to the UK if possible, or to look for alternative supplies outside of Europe? And lastly, I would also say that the geopolitics of international trade is very much sits underneath this as well. You've seen that already, the international vulnerability to supply chains because of geopolitics around trade wars, about trade disputes, around, to a certain extent, nationalism when it comes to certain countries applying trade policy, has also affected both policymakers and government and businesses making an assessment about the vulnerability to their supply chains of trade with a certain country. And obviously at the moment, that has been an underlying issue for some time, but we've seen that come to the surface, particularly over the course of 4 or 5 years. No greater point, of course, than in the early phases of the pandemic, that nationalism came in terms of sovereign protection for medical health equipment supplies and other things too. So you've seen all those three factors: pandemic, EU trade, and also the geopolitics of international trade, make an assessment both for government and also for business about the vulnerability of your economy to significant supply chain challenges. I think, as Tim has alluded to, I think now that we have a more established Department for International Trade alongside our Department for Business, I think there is certainly the breadth of ability to have that strategic assessment of what and where our vulnerabilities might lie, just in terms of understanding what could be future threats to that and what political judgments might need to be made around that. But it is also a case too that businesses undoubtedly over the course of the last few years have experiences at the front line, those disruptions, and are making assessments now as to what way and how do they change their supply chain to make them less vulnerable to some of those issues that we've seen over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tamara. That leads us on to Professor Alan Winters.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. I want to pick up really exactly where Richard just left us and talk about reshoring, which is fashionable in policy circles. And I just wanted to inquire, in a sense, at a factual level, are you seeing evidence of this occurring? In a sense, driven by policy or driven by business considerations? And secondly, is it something which the UK should be encouraging or the opposite? So let me start with Richard, since he landed us here.
Thank you, Alan. There's no question from a business point of view, there is further evidence that firms are looking to reshore or certainly reappraise the supply chains they've got, look to where those vulnerabilities might be, make sure there is not just a reliance on a single supplier for a single critical component. So all that assessment is going on, and our latest data suggests there is more evidence that firms this year and into next will be making those assessments and making adjustments to do so. That is certainly not across the piece, that is certainly not the majority of firms, but there's an increasing minority of firms, probably about a fifth or so, who have responded to say that is an active part of their consideration over the course of the next 12 months or so. Of course, there are limitations to that. The limitations are, of course, that the UK doesn't in itself at the moment have a complete suite of supply chain options to it. Some key commodities, raw materials and others are not available in the UK, and therefore you have to rely on international supply chains to help you with the supply of those critical products. And also, to a certain extent, firms are in commercial relationships, which they don't want to necessarily disrupt at this particular moment in time. And therefore, those are considerations also as to how quickly and in what way does reshoring or a reassessment of it take up as well. I think it's also important to mention, lastly, that what we're potentially beginning to see too, where firms have the ability to do, is take far greater control over their supply chains, and that might mean mergers and acquisitions. It might mean deeper integration in some way, so they have far greater control over what they're actually able to import in terms of critical raw materials. So it's those three things which I think will play a part in the course of the next couple of years in terms of a shift or behavioural shift to one which will have a greater focus on reassessment of supply chains and undoubtedly decisions to reinvest more geographically locally.
Thank you very much, Richard. Perhaps turn to Simon. Is there anything you want to add to that, Simon?
I think Richard covers it, but I think that just on, do we see any evidence? No. But what we do see is conversations, as Richard says, about taking control of supply chain. So I mentioned earlier a program of works that we're involved in called Zero Carbon Humber, where there is a potentially very strong procurement opportunity for British manufacturing firms around pipelines, for hydrogen, for carbon capture storage, all around on both banks of the Humber, and where the collaboration between a whole series of companies are looking at establishing the UK supply chain for that, to set a sort of a threshold that must be met of the content coming from UK companies. So that should hopefully provide an incentive for some level of investment in that capability, whether that's reshoring or domestic expansion. And then I think the other point I would make is just around the offshore wind sector, where we have traditionally seen a massive expansion of capability and installed capacity in offshore wind, but largely by buying in the kit. But we are seeing some shift in that, and particularly with the UK government insisting on a certain level of UK content, which I think is impacting upon some certain firms' decision making.
Thank you very much. Tim, do you want to contribute?
Look, yeah, I think Richard has covered most of the points very effectively. We're still working with essentially anecdotal evidence on what's been happening so far, and we are only talking about a very short space of time that people have been adjusting to both the change in the UK's position, having left the EU, plus that this huge evolutionary change that is coming with concern over the impact of climate change and so forth. That will play out over a period of 15, 20 years or more. And so while there will be strong pressures and there will be innovations which will lead to changing the way we do things in order to meet with the new expectations that the consumers and industry and others will have out there, these, as I say, will take quite some time to play out. They will offer up some good opportunities. The one thing that we need to keep in perspective is that from a manufacturing perspective, the tariff barrier, at least, is now a very small thing. We've pretty much done all the work on tariffs. The rates across industrialized countries tend to be 2 to 3%. So the tariffs themselves are not a disincentive. The issues that we're dealing with in adjusting to the regulatory side of things is a big issue for the time being. How it plays out over time is something that will take time for us to fully understand and appreciate. But those with well-established commercial connections and networks and so forth will continue, at least for the medium term, to rely on maintaining those sorts of links and profiting from them. And so that's really going to dampen the speed with which we move into more of an onshoring environment.
Thank you very much. Can I just take a 15-second supplementary? Since you do rules of origin, have any of the people you deal with explicitly said they're thinking of changing their supply chain because of the rules of origin?
I've had a couple of comments along those lines. Some of the hidden nasties in the rules of origin as they apply in the EU agreement have caught some people out. So you get some of the accumulation effects, which I could spend a couple of hours talking about the meaning of accumulation, but they're discovering that if you do part of your processing in the UK and part of your processing in the EU, and you're moving goods backwards and forwards at different stages of production, you can suddenly find that you're no longer eligible for preferential access. And it's a bizarre sort of approach to rules of origin. There are good reasons for it in political minds, but they're not the sorts of things that I find to be terribly attractive. And that has caused some problems. And there are some people now, I don't know whether those sorts of comments have come out on the spur of the moment when people are just angry at the fact that and frustrated at what they're facing. But yeah, I have had some of those sorts of comments that we'd be much better off just doing everything in Europe or doing everything here and just accept the additional cost or whatever, or the loss of local connections.
Thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. Can we move on to Andrew Ballheimer?
Thanks very much. Thank everyone as well for the excellent sort of answers. Picking up, on the point earlier, that adjustments are being made by many firms, and it's a work in progress. I mean, as you look now, and also, sort of in the medium term, is the UK, an attractive location for those planning to invest in new manufacturing production? Interested in your views, Richard, maybe first.
I think there's still optimism the UK is, even with the changes that we have set out or we have seen so far. I still think there's a huge appetite for the quality of UK manufacturing, both as a centre of excellence, but also as a contributor to those supply chains that we've talked about. Despite there are some challenges, and I listened to some of the previous session around skills, apprentices, and all that infrastructure issue, which is absolutely critical for us. Despite those, and addressing those are critical. But despite that, UK is still seen as a centre of excellence for manufacturing, both in terms of current capability, but also looking at some of the innovation that's coming forward through not just industry, but also those collaborations with institutional arrangements as well. So the UK is still attractive. It still will draw in that international investment, and that obviously government must play a much more critical role in flag raising for Britain on the international stage and bringing that excellence to the attention of international audiences and investors. That is absolutely critical, considering we are now competitive, or sorry, we are going to be as competitive, or need to be as competitive as other critical countries when it comes to where that pound dollar is going to be spent in investment. Now, I also think too that we must also have a more strategic line between what we want to achieve in our domestic economy when it comes to manufacturing and what those international opportunities are for export. We haven't quite got that definition right yet. We are certainly pursuing an international trade policy, which is aggressive, which is about accumulating trade discussions and trade arrangements with other countries. But what we haven't quite seen in the same way is the marrying up of what our domestic policy priorities are going to be to support those objectives going forward. We have a huge opportunity with green and tech. Our net zero championship through COP26, for example, should be a great platform of bringing forward those discussions where that investment can be full. And I certainly agree with earlier comments about green technology here and etc. So we must demonstrate a strong industrial base which has foundations in what we want to be known for in the future in the manufacturing capability. That will draw in investment, but that will also link in with our international trade ambitions on an international footing.
Thank you. Tim, interested in your views? In the medium term as well, I'd be quite interested as well.
Yeah, the government has started reasonably well on this in terms of providing incentive for industrial development in the UK and for manufacturing. So that's a good sign. It's an early sign. Whether it's well coordinated, I heard what Richard was saying there, and I think I agree entirely with him. But the UK manufacturing industry of the future is going to be very different to what we've known from the past. Obviously, we're not going to be able to attract labour-intensive manufacturing because we just can't compete on wage levels. That's gone. That's not coming back. The UK is almost certainly going to continue to focus on capital-intensive high-tech industries, and this is where the the UK can do very well. It does have a well-deserved reputation for innovation and development. I mean, as an outsider, as someone from outside the UK, we've always been very well aware of just how strong the UK has been as a technological leader in so many industries, and this provides a good opportunity for the UK to do well in the future in attracting more of those sorts of industries to become, in one respect, a niche manufacturer, but nevertheless, that's a very high value and very useful manufacturing. So it's providing great wealth to the country and providing a lot of employment as well. So look, there are good opportunities out there, and the UK remains very attractive, I think, to foreign investment.
Simon.
The UK, I guess my starting point would be that the UK has long been an attractive place for inward investment. At various points, we've been the #1 destination for inward investment into Europe. And I think that notwithstanding the discussions with the EU, I think that we continue to be an attractive destination for inward investment. And I think manufacturing falls within that for the reasons that Richard and Tim have outlined around a reputation for quality, and particularly at the higher innovation-led end. Speaking, in my sort of parochial interests here, I think that we've seen some fairly significant inward investment from whether it's for the likes of Boeing or McLaren, or whether it's Rolls-Royce looking to invest in the UK and the capabilities here, as been mentioned, in fairly capital-intensive automated manufacturing capabilities. So we are seeing it, and sitting, in a slightly privileged position that I do here, that we do see a pipeline of potential investments coming into this region, and indeed, where we have other footprints in Lancashire and indeed North Wales. So I am positive, but I come back to my sort of, I guess my sort of point that I was making, particularly in the last session. I think the marrying of domestic industrial strategy with our international market access and international trade strategy, I think need to marry up far stronger than they are currently.
Yeah. So cautious optimism, I guess, is the conclusion, right?
That's right.
Thank you. Back to the chair. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. And last but by no means least, we will move on to Alison. And I think Alison has a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So I'd like to turn our attention to SMEs. We tend to hear a lot about big manufacturing companies like Rolls-Royce, JCB. But what are the roles, or what is the role of SMEs in this sector? Are they dependent on these larger players, or are they able to trade successfully on their own? If we could start with Tim, please.
Yeah, certainly it tends to be the bigger companies that grab the attention. But if we look at an industry or a sector like automotive, the automotive industry, the suppliers of suppliers and so forth account for 40% of the employment, the manufacturing side of things. There are 2,500 approximately suppliers in the automotive industry, and the vast majority of them we don't know their names. They're not out there making headlines. They are essentially small and medium-sized enterprises, and they play a fundamental role there, and not just in supplying the domestic market, but also in exporting as well. The automotive suppliers in the UK in the last full year of production, normal year of production here, before COVID hit us, we're doing more than 5 billion pounds worth of business into the EU, or at least internationally, and 70% of that was to the EU. So it's they're a fundamental part of most of the major industry sectors here. They will continue to be, and they. But it also underscores that at the moment, the vast majority of that continues to be trade with the EU, and it's the SMEs that face the biggest challenges, because they tend to be the least resourced when it comes to dealing with issues to do with administrative challenges of getting goods from the factory gate to their consumers. And we certainly need to see an environment which allows the SMEs to do what they do so well, with minimum disruption when it comes to trying to get those goods to market, wherever those markets happen to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's very consistent with all of the evidence sessions that we've run, that SMEs tend to be kind of really core at the center of a lot of these industries, but are definitely the hardest hit in terms of the kind of the scale of change and their ability to absorb it. Thank you. Richard, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, yes, I think Tim has summarised that very well. I think it would be wrong to profile UK manufacturing as only been dominated from an export point of view from the big brands that we would normally associate ourselves with. Export profile of manufacturing goes from the SMEs right up to the global brands. All do so for a variety of strategic reasons, whether that is because the domestic market isn't sufficient for them, they want to expand internationally. It gives them an ability to achieve scale, which they wouldn't be able to do, brings innovation back into the UK as well for them too, because they're up against international counterparts, so they are able to do that too. And lastly, of course, it achieves growth. So all the reasons that a normal company, any size company, would want to export is typified whether you're an SME or a large scale company. There are some differences between the two, of course, and Tim has alluded to the fact of resources and being able to resource up what you need to do if you're going to achieve a significant amount of export sales. And I think at the moment, again, I'll come back to a point that those SMEs do need additional support to be able to develop and understand those international markets. It is about skills. It is about learning what international trade is. International trade is law, and it is commerce, and it's strategic awareness, as well as just being able to make a product and put it on a lorry and send it to someone. There's lots of skills that have to be learned by SMEs to do that, and upskilling in that area is hugely important, as well as being able to identify those international market opportunities, the intelligence of a local market, the concierge ability of knowing who to talk to, critical resource limitations for many firms, but critical for them to have success. And that's where I think additional support from government is needing. Also, just to bear in mind, coming back to that European supply chain point, which obviously we've touched upon, many of the SMEs do and are part of those supply chains, maybe first tier or second tier. So they are integral to those supply chains. They may not be the exporters of the final product to a customer, but they're an integral part of that European supply chain. And therefore, it's important for them to have that continuity going forward as well. But I do think many of them do see the opportunity of going beyond the EU, particularly those who have finished products. And whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's medical devices, whether it's specialists in aviation products, whether it's chemicals or whatever, there's a lot of very good SME firms exporting really hard, really competitive into the international market. They don't get the recognition because they're not household names, but many of them have expert resources. And one thing they are very good at doing, and this is a difference from an SME compared to a larger firm, is that SMEs love peer learning. They love to learn from their peers how they have been successful in critical markets. That's how they learn and develop. And those SME champions are exceptionally good at giving those war stories of what it's like being in competitive international markets. And we need to enhance that and develop that even further.
Yeah, it's a very powerful, compelling description of that community. Thank you. Simon, before we move on to the last question, is there anything you'd like to add on the SME question?
No, it's simply to somewhat echo what Richard and Tim have said about the importance of the SME community. But the point I would make is just it's quite a broad category as well. Broad in terms of size and capability, broad in terms of their innovation capability and ability to adopt new technology and techniques, and indeed to trade internationally, and indeed great variation in where they sit in the supply chain, whether they're direct to consumer or B2B enterprises. So there's a huge amount of variation. But the point I would make about SMEs is really SMEs are by far the largest part of the business community in any region, and to that extent are part of the resilience of our communities and their ability to withstand economic shocks and to provide the well-being and prosperity we all want.
Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, just in the last few minutes, we might have to do a very quick whip round. What are the competitive threats to our future as manufacturers, and what are your main recommendations on how we tackle this? So maybe reverse order, Simon.
2 words: industrial strategy.
Thank you. Richard?
Industrial strategy linked to an international trade strategy that recognises the value of manufacturing within it. Looks at also issues beyond tariffs as critical aspects of trade negotiations. We haven't really touched on that, but there are various aspects of trade negotiations beyond tariffs which are important for manufacturers to be able to export successfully, and also to give the resources, particularly for SMEs, to give them the skills and the capability of being able to export more.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, look, I think the two, from my perspective, the biggest threat is would be ongoing disruptions to UK-EU trade. You can't divorce yourself from 50% of your import and export market without the potential for major costs and problems. We need to bed down that relationship, make it more effective. We need to ensure that the manufacturers and others that are working within that relationship have a clear voice in determining where it goes, so that we can have an effective relationship, an ongoing relationship with the EU. That's just essential to UK manufacturing, UK trade. And we just can't allow for high admin costs and delays in just-in-time supply and so forth to dominate the storyline for going forward. And the other one, which is, I'm not so sure that it's necessarily just a threat, it could be seen as a challenge or as an opportunity, and that is if we don't have a coordinated response to the challenges of climate change, that is changing people's, consumers, manufacturers' expectations of how the world will work in the future. It is changing the nature of products which will be acceptable to the marketplace. We need to have a solid policy in place that recognises the reality of this and how that is impacting not just on the planet, but on the people that populate that planet as well, and what their expectations might be. And this probably goes back to what we've mentioned a number of times during this discussion. The reputation that the UK has for innovation is something which drove the UK as a leader of the first industrial revolution, and I believe has the opportunity to do the same for this new industrial revolution, which is exactly what this represents for us. We need to have an environment in place which recognises the capacity of UK innovators and manufacturers to rise to the challenge. So as I say, I'm not sure it's necessarily a threat. I would hopefully see it more as an opportunity and a great challenge for UK industry.
Yeah, and let's end the session on an opportunity. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for your time today. Back to the chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. And I would want to put on record our thanks to what have been two excellent teams with a wealth of experience and knowledge. And also it has given us an opportunity to see the challenges and opportunities that we can, as a nation and as manufacturers within the UK, face and meet on the way forward. Also want to congratulate the support team and basically identifying the right people to bring along and to ensure that we get a good opportunity to bring ourselves up to speed with what is going on and the opportunities that are there and the challenges that we face. So I have nothing further to say, and thank you all very much for attending this morning, and all of those commissioners who took the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you very much indeed.